even if you don't come out, and I think our relationship with the notion of coming out has shifted, thankfully, because I grew up thinking I had to come out. I grew up thinking that is what I owed the world, that I had to announce my sexual orientation. I don't think anybody has to come out. You can be wherever you are on your sexual journey. You don't owe anybody an explanation, but it's helpful to have that conversation with yourself.
Are we looking at the downfall of the 21st century gay dating scene? Explore this topic with Sarp. And our sponsor for today's episodes is Beyond, the newest dating app in town. Check it out at datebeyond.co.
Hello. You're listening to WOBC at 91.5 FM with DJ Sky.
Wow.
I actually had a radio show. So
oh my goodness.
This is just me missing it.
Okay, radio show, voice me up in here. Tell me it's the Beyond Dating Podcast. Introduce yourself. And
welcome to the Beyond Dating Podcast. Is it Beyond? I'm sorry. Is it
yeah,
Beyond
it is.
Dating?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll try again. Welcome to the Beyond Dating Podcast. My name is Sarp Yavuz, and I'm about to make a complete fool of myself.
But we're going to have so much fun. So really, what is the fall of the 21st century gay?
Oh, come on. What is the fall of the 21st century gay? I think, and this is going to come up a lot, I think Grindr has a lot to do with it. Because funnily enough, when I first started using it, I was in Istanbul. I came to America when I was 18 for college from Istanbul. And I was in a very rural part of Ohio where using any kind of app wasn't really an option because the campus was so small that you might as well just, climb up a table and be like, hi, I'm gay and single. And there would maybe be like two other people who would wave at you, and that's pretty much it. So I started using Grindr when I would go back home for summer vacation. And it was mostly landscape photos or close-ups of people's torsos because nobody was out. Thankfully, that's changing a little bit. But back then, it was a very closeted community. And I was one of the few people who put their faces on their profile because I came out of the closet in Turkey when I was 13, which I do not recommend anybody do, by the way, because it just turns you into an exotic bird, and people are either fascinated by you or they're afraid to talk to you, but it doesn't really create a sense of normalcy ever, in the context of the Middle East, at least. Since then, and I think it was 2010 when I first downloaded Grindr, the app shifted dramatically. The conversations that take place on the app shifted dramatically. And I think New York is one of the most toxic places to be on any gay dating app because there is this bizarre kind of hostility that comes with the anonymity that any app brings. And I think there's also this aggression that maybe is partially fueled by the pandemic and sort of our loss of our social selves or our sense of social interaction. Maybe it's because people think they can get away with it because there's enough options here. But I have never seen so much hostility in one app. And it's been just jarring.
Wait, so what goes down on Grindr?
Well, my favorite is, and I have receipts. Can I read some of them, actually?
Yes, please.
I feel like you're going to love these.
Give me the tea.
The tea is, this was, I think I got this a year ago, midnight, or at least, actually, I'll be very specific, 12:31, random guy. I say, hi. 12:32, no, and your art is garbo.
Oh, rude.
And I'm like, you had 30 seconds. How did you, either you already know my art, which is kind of flattering, or you just went into my linked Instagram profile and decided in 30 seconds flat that this was the appropriate response. But either way, I'm like, why the hostility,
Like, why you gotta be so hot?
I feel like blocking is oftentimes easier than just saying something mean. But it gets better because a couple of days later, I say hi to a guy. He says, LOL. I go, what's up? He goes, hope you are taking care of yourself. At least you should charge. You would make more money. I go, what? I don't need to charge anything. What are you talking about? He goes, the photography is not doing it. LOL. I say, actually it is. To which he responds, sorry, I have to be honest. I was catfishing and now I feel super guilty.
Oh my goodness. How many catfishes are out there?
Oh, so many. So many.
Oh gosh.
But between those guys and the people who just say, hey, you look like a Turkish delight, which I've never heard before, it's pretty chaotic out there.
Oh my gosh, just chaos out on Grindr. Oh my goodness.
I know.
I kind of want to use it, but like I don't think I would fit in on there. We'll see.
We'll see. I mean,
maybe we'll change it around.
We should, honestly. You know, there's an urban legend that they tried it for, I think they tried it for lesbians for a hot second. And then they realized there really is no market for lesbians who are up at 2 a.m. wanting to have anonymous sex.
Yeah.
So that never really took off. I think it was called Blender. I might be making this up. This is like a very faint memory from, I think, a decade ago.
Okay. I'll have to look that up. I'm looking for a good lesbian dating site, but
I don't know if I would recommend Grindr.
Definitely not Grindr.
But also, you know, it's where everybody is.
Yeah.
It's like using Street Easy for real estate in New York. It's horrible, but that's where everything is.
That's
so
where
you kind of have to.
You got to do it. So if you could create your own dating app, what would you put on it?
I think there are components of Hinge that have come close where they introduce prompts. And one of them was something like what I'm looking for. And if you choose to be honest with that when filling out that prompt, I think that holds a lot of promise. Because I think first off, it makes you ask yourself, what am I looking for? Because oftentimes, you know, when you go beyond I'm horny and I just want to meet with someone, you start thinking, well, what is the ideal situation for me? What is my ideal guys, people? And I realized that I felt uncomfortable answering that question when I first saw it as a prompt that the app just generated for me. And then I decided to put in consistency, kindness, and put in one more thing and I can't remember what it was. But the number one thing was consistency for me, because I realized that I kept dating guys who would say one thing and then do the other. And that sort of created a trauma response for me after a while.
So what was that trauma response, if you mind sharing?
I think it stemmed from wanting to believe people when they say they are a certain way, wanting to believe people when they say they feel towards you a certain way, and realizing that so many of us are conditioned to say things based on what we assume the other person's expectations are. And we say them because it sounds good. We say them because it saves the moment, but then we don't actually follow up. So I kept finding myself in situations where, like in my early 20s, I was living in Chicago, where I went to grad school at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I kept finding myself in situations where I would end up flirting with the bartender of whatever bar I was at. And if the bartender paid attention to me, that was like a huge validation for me, huge ego boost. And I think there was a power dynamic there that I didn't fully realize at the time, that I was sort of enjoying, that's what I was pursuing at the end. But if you're in a crowded gay bar at 2 a.m. and you're asking the bartender a lot of intimate, hardcore questions, at some point they're just going to give you answers for the sake of giving you answers. And that's okay. They're working, it's late, everyone's drunk, maybe you're drunk too. But I would hold on to those answers and I'd be like, no, like he said he likes me and he gave me a whiskey shot. That's true love. And I realized way too late that it wasn't true love. He was just, you know, dealing with a patron that he might want to take home, but he didn't necessarily, you know, love the way I perceived that interaction to be.
So what is your ideal version of true love?
Ooh. I don't know if I have an answer for that. I think from a very early age, I've gravitated towards people that I could build things with. Like my two childhood best friends, and we've been best friends since we were 3. We would always go for the big box of Legos in preschool, and we would build together, and that's what actually made us friends. And since then, I've always gravitated towards people who are interested in building things, designing things, shaping things together. Like, do you want to cook together? Do you want to, I mean, this is my fantasy ever since the pandemic. Do you want to go renovate a chateau in the south of France together? Or as a sort of starter house, do you want to maybe do like a little HGTV special somewhere in the States and maybe, you know, bicker about, are we going to flip it or are we going to keep it? And I think there's something so genuine about dreaming together and then following up on that dream together that my ideal person would be someone who's interested in building something with me.
So what does your ideal relationship style look like?
As much as I want to say I'm evolved enough to entertain non-monogamous options, I think I'm hardwired, perhaps as a Gemini, perhaps as an only child, to crave the majority of the attention and also to give it, because I take pictures of naked men for a living. I'm an artist. I often deal with extraordinarily beautiful people. Most of them are cisgender men who present as, you know, supermodels or just people that you would notice if they entered a room. And if I'm in a relationship and if I feel emotionally committed in that relationship, I don't even think about the fact that there's this gorgeous man naked in front of me, even though I've definitely been in relationships where my partners felt very threatened by that. Because oftentimes I'm in a dark room with just that person for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. It doesn't even cross my mind that I might cheat. It's just so effortless. If I'm emotionally invested in you, I don't care how pretty the other person in front of me is. It's just not how I'm wired. So I think there has to be a level of effortlessness that comes from security, and that comes from a genuine connection. That goes beyond love, I think, because I think it goes beyond affection. I think it is also paired with respect. It's paired with comfort. And to go back to my previous answer, I think it's paired with the desire to build something together, which I think eclipses however many people are attractive in front of you.
Wow, that's so interesting. So how do you navigate being monogamous in this, wild hookup culture and Grindr and everything going on?
I don't know, because I almost got married before the pandemic. And I say almost because it was one of those things where we were joking about it. It was a 2-year relationship. We were joking about it, and then we were actually talking about it. And I sensed that he was going to pop the question. And I also realized that he wasn't the one. I loved him the way I would love a dear friend. And a lot of people told me that's a great foundation for a marriage. But something about it made me feel like if I got into this, I would ask for a divorce eventually. And so we broke up, and I moved to New York in 2018. And since then, all of the relationships that I've had have been very short-lived or very transient, because I think, and a lot of other gay people echo this that are in my circle, I think we have too much choice. And I think the availability of options and backup plans and, I have another date 2 hours after you, that culture prevents us sometimes from giving something an honest shot, because we don't have to be vulnerable. We feel comfortable just being like, hi, okay, bye, and then moving on to the next thing. So the short answer to your question is I am really failing at navigating it, I think, because I haven't found anyone, or I haven't gone on a date with someone that I actually want to have a monogamous relationship with, nor have I had that kind of connection the way I think I was having in Chicago. And I lived there between the years of 2013 to 2018, and I feel like maybe culturally it was a different time too. I think post-pandemic we're still trying to find our footing in a lot of ways. And I also think that I often joke that I've become a little feral, like a cat, where I've become too used to being in my own space on my own that I don't fully feel comfortable being with someone for an extended period of time like that.
Wow, that's super interesting. The pandemic has done a lot for the way people date, for sure. What other differences have you noticed pre and post pandemic with, the way you date and the way other people try to, date you or pursue you?
I think pre-pandemic, we actually would go on dates. And I see that less and less now, at least in the gay community. I can't remember the last time I actually had like a dinner date with someone. And I've gone on dates, but it's just been much more compact. It's not a dinner anymore, it's a drink. Because maybe the feralness that I'm talking about exists on both parties. Maybe we're both more precious with our time. Or maybe we're both, maybe we both have an aversion to spending that much time outside with somebody that we don't know. I think how we approach our own time has shifted. And it's funny because a lot of my friends who were married pre-pandemic decided to get a divorce or started couples counseling during the pandemic because they realized they're not prepared to spend that much time together alone. And similarly, it sort of raised the bar for me because I realized that of all the people I had dated before the pandemic, I was very glad that I was not stuck in a house with any of them, which I think is a very interesting bar to have for any relationship where you're like, oh, like I thought I'd love this guy. And I do still love a lot of them. I mean, some of them are my really good friends, but I'm really glad that I got to spend that time alone. And that's a threshold that I think people don't take into account because so oftentimes we're too busy with our own lives that we think this is going to be the dynamic. I'm not going to see you X amount of time during the week, and we're going to see each other in the evenings and on the weekends. So the alternative to that is really scary for a lot of people. It's scary for me.
Do you have, any tips for anybody who's trying to just like embrace themselves and be comfortable spending time with themselves, to find that, I don't know, whether it's like self-love or self-comfortability before they go out back into the dating world?
I do, actually, because one of the benefits of the pandemic for me was people coming up to me and saying, I have no idea how you do what you do. It's so hard for me to work from home. And in one way or another, like most artists, I have been working from home for a decade. In fact, work-wise, the pandemic didn't really shift the way I produce things because I do need that alone time. And I have a lot of friends who struggled with that. I have a lot of friends who started drinking to the point where they felt uncomfortable with the amount that they were consuming. I have a lot of friends who turned to hobbies out of desperation and then told me that they didn't even recognize themselves anymore because they felt like they had become another version of themselves. I think it's really important for all of us to get used to the idea that you have to feel comfortable in your skin before you want to bring somebody else into that space. And the way I dealt with it was I started reading again. That was something that I had lost after grad school because during grad school you have to read a lot of really dense texts and then you start resenting reading. And a lot of my friends went through this too, who were in grad school. We just sort of stopped picking up a book. And I realized early in the pandemic that I have lost my ability to focus. I would read 2-3 pages and then I would have to put the book down because my mind would wander. And I forced myself to read because that's one of those things where you're letting everything that's happening in the background in your head sort itself out. And you're also doing something that is inherently enjoyable, that is making you maybe slightly better because you're absorbing a story that isn't prepackaged for you the way a Marvel movie is. Maybe you're discovering a perspective that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. You're vulnerable with books, much more so than you are with movies and film. So I would recommend that you try to sit somewhere alone. It can be a restaurant, it can be your home, and read alone, without headphones, without sunglasses, without the pretense of, oh, I'm only doing this waiting for something social to happen. Actually have that be the focal point. And it's fascinating the way it forces you to make peace with yourself, because you're on your own, and it is vulnerable, but it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. I like the making peace with yourself before you can, share yourself with others. I think that's really important. I want to switch it up a little bit.
All right.
So I wanted to hear your take on the bi community here in New York, or that you've experienced in the past, maybe in Chicago.
I would say that I think maybe 60% of the men that I've hooked up with, especially in college, were closeted bi men, who oftentimes would approach it with, "Oh, I'm not gay." And at first, my frustration was, "Oh, so then am I an experiment?" And only after a certain time has passed, I realized, "Oh, you're actually just attracted to people who present as male and female, and you're not prepared to admit that to yourself." And in certain instances, I was very happy that I was able to sort of help people figure that out. In certain instances, I would resent them, because I would be like, "Why do you have a girlfriend now? Why wasn't I enough? Was I just a temporary thing?" And it created this mental blockage for me that was partially fueled by that infamous Sex and the City episode that villainizes bisexual men. I don't know if you recall. That episode where Carrie dates a really cute guy. I think he's ice skating. Mm-hmm. I think Alanis Morissette was in that episode too, where the whole episode is devoted to why bisexual men are actually gay men in denial. This bi erasure that established itself as the canon for Western culture for maybe 20 years before we finally started talking about bisexuality. I echoed that sentiment. I believed what Carrie told me to believe for a very long time. I was like, "Oh, you're just trying to figure your stuff out, and then you'll eventually make your way to me or to another man." And then I befriended people who were very comfortable with their bisexuality, and they showed me that it's not black and white. It's not you're either gay or you're straight. There's actually a whole cornucopia of options in the middle, or orientations, I should say. I am trying to remember if I've ever actually had a relationship with a bisexual man. Get back to me on that. I don't remember it.
So, do you have any tips and tricks for, people looking to embrace and explore their sexuality?
Good lighting.
Good lighting.
Good lighting is key. I mean, I say this as a photographer. It's the one thing I would actually die for is good lighting.
Okay.
I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about feeling comfortable in your own skin. I think oftentimes we suppress parts of ourselves in a way that they come out when we're feeling vulnerable or drunk or angry. And then I've witnessed this happen so many times. People end up rushing into things as an experiment and then waking up and panicking and being like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just did that," and trying to exit that situation as quickly as possible. I mean, I grew up in the Middle East. I would see that every day. It still happens when I go back home sometimes, where like last summer, I was visiting a friend's house, a girlfriend's house, someone that I grew up with, and her new husband. And halfway through the dinner, she went into the kitchen to grab something. And I could have sworn her husband made a pass at me. And I realized, oh, like, you're doing this because that is what is expected of you in this part of the world. And there's a part of you that you've never been able to explore. And I think even if you don't come out, and I think our relationship with the notion of coming out has shifted, thankfully, because I grew up thinking I had to come out. I grew up thinking that is what I owed the world, that I had to announce my sexual orientation. I don't think anybody has to come out. I think we're finally at a place in terms of, I guess, maybe not global culture, but certainly Western culture, where you can be wherever you are on your sexual journey. You don't owe anybody an explanation, but it's helpful to have that conversation with yourself instead of pushing those thoughts away, instead of pretending they don't exist. Or I see this happening too, where people are, skipping through channels or skipping through Netflix, and a scene comes on where there's a gay storyline or a lesbian storyline or a trans storyline, and people quickly want to switch to something else. Watch that. Whatever makes you uncomfortable, witness, even if it's fictional, what that story tells you, makes you feel. Allow it to become part of your mental library, because then you have a reference point when you feel a certain way and you go, oh, well, I've seen how this can unfold, and it doesn't mean that the world will end. So oftentimes we think of sexual vulnerability in catastrophic terms because we're so insecure about how we present to the world and how the world perceives us. But giving yourself permission to experiment and giving yourself permission to fantasize is really crucial.
So I want to hear more about your art now and how, that connects to your sexuality and, your background, where you came from, and maybe religion as well.
Religion is a funny story because I was raised by an agnostic mother and a socialist father who was largely absent. But what that meant was, I think I was 5. I'm in preschool. I have a lot of memories from preschool. I was 5. We're playing. Somebody says, oh, something, Allah. And a couple of people nod. And I'm like, who's Allah? And everyone looks at me. I'm like, what? What am I missing here? Like, is this something is this someone who's coming in? Is it someone's dad? And they go, no, Allah, the guy with the beard in the clouds. And I'm thinking, Santa Claus? They go, no, different. He can see you. He watches you all the time. And then I couldn't pee for the rest of the day because I was worried that someone was watching me. And I come home and I have tears in my eyes and I'm like, I want to go to the bathroom. There's a guy watching me. So then my mom's like, who's watching you pee? Like, what's going on? And I tell them, they told me, Allah is watching you. And I remember my parents looking at each other and they go, oh. And they realized they had completely forgotten to tell me about religion. So that was like a rude awakening for me because I was introduced to it at an age where you're a little too old to be indoctrinated, because then they have to walk me through the people believe this bit as opposed to this is reality. So I grew up with a lot of skepticism towards religion. And I never felt burdened by religion the way a lot of queer people feel. But I did feel religious pressure because Turkish culture is deeply traditional. And oftentimes the line between Muslim traditions and what is actually in the Quran is very blurred. You don't know what is secular and what isn't, because it's all sort of packaged into one thing. So I certainly felt the alienation that a lot of queer folk feel when they come from more conservative societies. But I've also dated people who came from deeply religious backgrounds. The man that I almost married was Mormon, actually. And it was fascinating to me to witness that there are so many levels to conservatism. And I think at the end of the day, the way I feel about religion is, if we are at a point in civilization where we can entertain the possibility that all of this might be a simulation, like if we are capable of making those simulations ourselves, and then we ask the question, what is this? Is this actually a matrix, if not the matrix? Then we have to come to terms with the fact that what we perceive as God might not necessarily be a guy in the clouds so much as, and this is really scary to think about, but so much as some people like Elon Musk, who maybe designed a simulation to figure out a problem or to explore something that they weren't able to explore unless all of this existed. And I think there's a lot of room for poetry in that. It doesn't scare me, the thought that maybe none of this is real, because then I'm like, well, what happens if we move to the next stage of this, whatever it might be? And so in that sense, marriage, when people talk about the sanctity of marriage, I often think, well, I also want to get married, but I don't think it's because I want to commit to someone in front of God or because I think it's spiritual in any way. I want to get married because I want to have a big fat wedding in Istanbul and piss off a lot of people.
Can I come to your wedding?
100%.
Yay.
It's actually a problem because there is a dedicated Pinterest. I already know who I'm inviting, to the point where I was making a joke about it and someone goes, oh, when is it? And I'm like, well, I have to find a husband first.
I got you on that. I can help you. I'm a good wingman, you know.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm keeping the bar low, though. I'm not going out there being like, are you my husband? I'm really trying to, if anything, lower my expectations and let things grow organically, because I think we often go into things expecting people to fit into this box in our heads. And when you're gay and when you're raised in a Western context as a male who is gay, we're not very good at communicating those expectations, but we're very good at resenting people for them, or resenting people for not adhering to those expectations. So I oftentimes will try to be as communicative and as clear as possible, which is why you should always date a Gemini, by the way.
But tell me about your art, more about your art, because you said you photograph naked men
I do.
all the time. So how does all of that, and you know, how does your upbringing and everything connect to your art, or like inspire your art?
Well, one of the first drawings I ever did, I think I was 5. We had just learned how to write letters. And they asked us, the prompt was draw something and then underneath it, caption it so we know what it is. And I drew a picture of a smiling boat on the Bosphorus Strait in Istanbul. And I put little, smiling people on the boat. And then I wrote, the boat that was curious about what was under the sea, in Turkish. And I remember the teacher asking me, well, what is this? And I remember explaining it as, well, the boat wants to dive and see what's below the water's surface, but it's carrying people. And if it did that, those people would drown. So it can't. So it's sad. So they call my mom. They're like, let's have a conversation about Sarp. And I think maybe 15 years later, I realized that that was my first recognition of my otherness and of the expectations that I felt I was betraying by being an other. Because I remember very clearly other people, my friends would say, oh, I'm going to marry this prince. Oh, I want to marry Batman, Superman, Lois Lane, whatever. I did not want a princess. It was very clear to me that I wanted Batman to be my very hypothetical partner, husband, whatever. So I knew very early on that I was different, and I knew that that was betraying some kind of invisible expectation. And I was making art about it in the most sincere way possible, because you're 5, there's no filter there. And oftentimes my work since then has focused on sexuality in one way or another. I did a series called Substitutes for My Father. It was a Polaroid series that I worked on between 2010 and 2013. And I would interview sons in my life about their fathers to contextualize that relationship, because I resented mine so much for not accepting me for who I am. So in a way, it was about exercising that internally. In a way, it was about forgiveness. But it was fascinating because the more I learned, the more I realized no one really has a super healthy relationship with their father. And oftentimes we're not very good at communicating those resentments, those fears, but we're so ready to share them when someone asks those questions kindly. And I ended up gathering about 100 stories, and I got invited by the Istanbul Modern Museum to share them in an exhibition when I was 21, which started my career, actually, as an artist. And after that, I started doing large format photography, where I would take these beautiful Americana scenes, more often than not in locker rooms in the Midwest, in college locker rooms. And I would take sort of large scale, beautifully lit pictures of men engaging in activities that could be deemed sexual or homoerotic, but only if an outsider were looking. And I called that series In the Closet because the joke was that this is sort of the pinnacle of masculinity. This is the sacred space that I never felt I belonged to. But by viewing it as an outsider, I am rendering it more sexual than it actually is among those people who are maybe used to seeing each other naked every day. And my current show, which is up at the Highline 9 in Chelsea, is about those frustrated relationships, my relationship with masculinity and the way it's depicted, but it's also about what I witnessed happen in Turkey over the last 20 years as the country became less and less secular as a result of a more conservative ruling party systematically shifting the culture to the point where I remember in the late 90s, people were talking about bisexuality, people were talking about queerness, and now they're actually redefining marriage to explicitly say it's between a man and a woman. Until now, for the last 100 years, it was a marriage is between two people. So now they're going backwards.
Wow.
It's really frustrating to witness, but I keep making a point of putting up all of my queer artworks in Istanbul as often as I can so that I'm actively pushing back.
So how can I find out more about your art? How can I go look at more of your art, and where can I find you?
I was recently accused that my Instagram handle has every letter of the alphabet, and I apologize for that. It's my full name. So it's Sarp Kerem Yavuz at Instagram. You can also come to the show if you're in New York, and if you're watching this and it's still winter 2023, the show will be up until February 16 at the High Line 9, which is on the corner of 27th and 10th. You can also just go to, and this is the easiest one, sarp.info.
Nice. Yeah, your art was so incredible. Seeing it the other day was just, wow, such an experience. I loved it.
When are you going to model for me?
Whenever you want. I'm ready. Let's do it. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you.
This has been great. Thank you for sharing.